whenever we're thinking about our own personal goals as well as goals for the world, or in terms of goals for society, we should be thinking about the differences in elevation that are possible, right? You can have a society that's more elevated, you can have a society that's less elevated. And at every moment in time, we're either going in one or the other direction. There's no such thing as standing still. There's no such thing as being static. And so society is always either moving upwards or moving downwards. And what do I mean by moving upwards and moving downwards? Well, there's a sense in which elevation is a metaphor for achieving or moving closer to one's greater, higher ideals, right? When we talk about ideals, we're talking about the higher and we're talking about the lower. And what's lower? Well, historically, what's lower is what's base, right? What's animalistic, what is the default state of things. And what's higher is that which is cultivated, that which is spiritually ascendant, elevated. It's impossible to get away from all these height metaphors. And generally speaking, what's at the top? Well, there's not a lot of things at the top because the surface area is very small. It's very hard to get to. And it also takes work, right? Like it took me an hour drive up through the hills and up the road to get here. And, the further from the downtown area I got, the fewer cars there were, the fewer people there were, the steeper, the rougher the road. And so this is sort of the nature of things moving upwards, right? You get higher into the peaks, you get a broader view of the area all down below, but you also have this sense of achievement, a sense of accomplishment, a sense of awe. And I think we need to consider whether the values that we're abiding by, whether the values that we're encouraging or the values that we're instilling in our social projects and our political projects are higher or are they lower, right? Are they elevated or are they base? When you're talking about which values go in which direction, Plato as well as Aristotle had certain notions of these things, right? The intellect or the love of wisdom was a higher value than something like, the love of money or the love of sex, the love of fulfilling one's animalistic desires. Similarly, things like beauty, right, are considered to be more elevated than others. And so when you're designing a regime, both for yourself as well as for others, right, because the regime has two meanings. It can mean the state of government, which is normally what we think about, but it can also mean something like a regimen, right? When you think of a regimen, what's a regimen? Well, that's like a personal set of procedures or pattern that you fall into. And so when you're thinking about a regime, whether it's a personal regime or a political regime, you should be thinking about the values that you're trying to instill, that you're trying to embody. And then you should be thinking about whether those values are elevating you or bringing you down. Are they ascendant or are they base? And really, all of civilization comes from this notion of moving further and further upwards. And this is not simply a Western thing or a Greek thing. Here in Bali, there are value systems from their religion. They have a very particular kind of Hinduism that they practice that incorporates elements of Buddhism and other animistic elements. And one of the things that comes out of this is that in their architecture, there is a symbolism. And the symbolism of their architecture is that the higher up you go, both in terms of a dwelling, but also in terms of other buildings and even the microstructures within the dwelling, the closer to God you are, and so therefore the more elevated it needs to be. And so when you go into a dwelling, the lowest possible floor is sort of the ground floor, and then there's a step up again, another set of elevation, which indicates that you're moving up from the ground, and that might be some plants or some furniture or something like that. And then the final step up, where the human beings are actually staying, is sort of the last level, and that's because the humans are closer to God than than the other creatures. And so this elevation again creates distinction, going back to my notion at the beginning of this discussion. And so whenever we're thinking about values for ourselves as well as values for others, we should be thinking about whether we are moving lower or higher, and we should be aiming, in my argument, towards higher. Thank you for watching.